are going to discuss the principle of correspondence with the intention that understanding how the principle manifests in our lives will lead to liberation. And I think being free and understanding freedom from this perspective of your spiritual self gives you, the incredible freedom to create the life that you want. And personally, I have not, let's say I'm on that journey. I'm not going to say I've mastered anything. I'm at a certain point. It's been a very strong focus for me. And as a result of having been freed from many, many concepts that I was indoctrinated with my parents and their perspective on life and the disappointments that I experienced in relationships or schooling or jobs, a lot of that has been scrutinized through a process, primarily meditation focused, with teachers, with prayer, with God, with tremendous amounts of grace, many trials, tribulations, difficulties, struggles, and et cetera, et cetera. I cannot sit here and go, happiness is awaiting us. I'm sorry. I haven't experienced it to be. I find happiness comes and goes daily. I really do. I find that there are moments when I experience a sense of happiness or fulfillment or joy that may last a few minutes, a few hours or so, and then maybe another situation comes around, a piece of news hits me, and all of a sudden I'm now feeling something else. And yet, throughout it all, what I do feel is free. I feel free to make choices, to be responsible for the life that I create. And this is, I think, what I would like to impart as somebody who has been raised up through this mystical path, a priest, that freedom is a very real and tangible thing, and then you will be faced with a choice of what you want your life to be about. How will you proceed through your understanding of the laws of creation to do what you wish to do here on the earth? So, the principle of correspondence is often categorized very simply by as above, so below, which sometimes doesn't really help anybody. It's like, can you explain what that means? It means that things that operate sort of on the macrocosm are mirrored in the microcosm and vice versa. Now, there is a kind of a cool 10-minute YouTube film that's available if you search it, called The Power of 10. And The Power of 10 begins with a scene of a couple on they're having a picnic, just a very typical scene, having a meal on a picnic, and the camera is on them, and then it just starts to pan back, and it continually pans back, and in the corner it shows you when you are 10 times larger perspective, and then 10 times larger than that, and it just keeps going back in space until it passes all the planets and then the galaxies and all this kind of stuff. And then, after it reaches a certain place of 10 million perspective out, of course you have no sense of the individuals, you can't see any planets, it's just kind of like space. And then it reverts back, and it reverses all the way back until it starts to now enter into the guy's hand on the picnic, and it goes the opposite, 10 to the minus 10 power or whatever. And what you recognize is that at the two extremes, it's almost impossible to differentiate, because the way that the cellular structure of a particular the molecular structure that exists within the human being is the same visual as the universe. Just sort of the movement of, like when you think about seeing atoms, and when an atom under a microscope, it looks like a kind of an outer space image of movements of planets and stars and whatnot. So it's kind of a cool way to begin the understanding that the universe is set up in a very organized way, and that things function outwardly in a mirror perspective as they function inwardly. Now that kind of film makes you go, wow, that's so cool. That's just a really neat thing. It's a cool way to describe or to experience it. But how is it going to help me in my quest to be free? Well, let's now shift our focus to my inner life and my outer life. The idea in the principle of correspondence as it relates to my quest for freedom and then my choices that would lead to happiness are, I begin to explore aspects of my outer life and go, where is my outer life not matching up to what I would like it to be? In what parts of my life do I feel, I wish this was better? I wish I didn't respond in these ways to these people. I wish I didn't have these attitudes. Or I don't know if these attitudes are right. Or something simple like, I wish I could manifest greater wealth. I mean, I'm not talking about being a billionaire, but if you struggle financially, why do I struggle financially? The teachings are that the universe is abundant. I've read about it. I've tried to apply the principles. I still struggle with finances. Or I tend to get really, really upset in these situations with my kids. I just feel so disrespected. I feel in relationships I can't merge the gap between, male and female. It's just, there's just things I see. Whatever the discrepancies that you experience, outwardly, we would say that the inner is going to mirror the same issue. And so if I can discover where the inner is congruent with the outer, and I go, well, actually what I want to do is I want to have a different outer perspective. Therefore, I need to examine the inner and find out what is it that's in place there that is actually contributing to this outer expressions. And I know that there's a certain amount of work to undo that because, first of all, you got to see it. And then once you see it, you decide that you no longer want to fulfill that negative belief system. I call it negative because it's kind of a constrained belief system that's based in a false teaching. The false teaching is that having an emotional expression is weakness. I don't agree with that. My perspective on emotions is that I have to experience them and process them, and what we call negative feminine is if I become so identified with my emotional state that I refuse to move out of it. That I would say, I'm not sure I'd say that is weakness, but I would say that is not prudent. In other words, if I have a heartbreak, some woman that I'm really in love with breaks up with me, yes, I'm going to have a period of mourning and grieving and going through the various stages of, whether it's the anger, the denial, whatever. But there's going to be a point where it'll start to subside, because I've been through this. I've been through 2 breakups that were, not by my choice. And so I know what it's like to go through it, and it sucks, basically. I'm sure many of you can relate to, if somebody breaks up with you and you didn't want to break up with them. Yeah.
Did you say negative feminine?
Yeah.
Okay.
So positive feminine, because we have positive masculine, negative masculine, positive and negative feminine, right? I was going to kind of get to that, but I'll just say a little bit about it, is that when the positive and masculine and the feminine, the positive and the negative expressions of both, to me, are working in harmony, then our thinking function and our feeling function love each other, and they cooperate to continually keep us in a state of currentness.
So masculine is thinking and feminine is...
It's one way to look at it. Well, I can't say that's, the hard, fast truth, but that's the way that I have interpreted it. That's the way I teach it, that my masculine function is governed by my thinking. And therefore, my masculine function is that which I use to make decisions. That's not to say men should make the decisions, right? And my feminine is the expression of love and feeling. And sometimes I get into a negative emotional state. That's not negative feminine. If I'm depressed or irritable or angry or anxious, that's just an emotional state. And that can be very positive. However, in my example, if I get dumped by somebody and it's like, okay, initially it's quite devastating and I'm really debilitated and I'm finding myself depressed, but I'm going through the process, and the process is I examine my emotions, I allow them to be, and I continually turn to my reasoning mind to say, okay, what are we going to do today to move ourselves forward? So the combination of that would be a positive. The masculine appreciates the feminine. It's like, those feelings are real. I honor them. I'm going to be with them as long as I need to. And then the masculine says, and now let's take some action to begin to move forward. Now, if the feeling side of me goes like, no, I don't want to take any action. I'm just going to isolate from people. I'm depressed. I thought this was going to be my wife, and I can't believe she did that. And my whole social life begins to emanate and be lodged in this negativity. That's what I call negative feminine. I'm going like, the negative emotions now define me, and nothing is going to pull me out of that. And you probably have had experience when people are in a state like that. Every time you get together with them, they got to talk on and on and on about this horrible thing that happened to them. Okay, so that's just somebody who maybe has not yet received this kind of teaching, and it makes sense to them. It's like, it's so against what they believe that they're going to stay there for a while. I don't want to do that because it's it constricts my freedom. Yeah, it sucks if somebody breaks up with you, but I want to get over it, and I don't want to deny any of the feelings. So my experience of what's weak when it comes to feelings is if I decide I'm going to stay in this crappy emotional state, it's not that that defines me as a weak person, but I think that weakens my overall, call it my vibration. It's like it'll be harder to get stuff moving. I mean, if you're around somebody who's depressed, you try to help them, but to a certain degree, people kind of go like, well, I don't know, the energy's kind of a bummer. I don't know if I want to spend a lot of time. Maybe as a friend I will try, but if it persists, there's an element where... And that's because that vibration tends to pull the environment down. Whereas if you're with somebody who's enthusiastic and encouraging and just listens really well and radiates love and confidence, the energy picks you up. And that's great. It's not to say I don't want to hang out with people who are down, because sometimes people are down and they just need somebody to listen to and be with. And that's a different energy than somebody who just wants to stew in it. I mean, I've talked to people that they just need an audience. They just want to go on and on and on about their stuff, And I draw a line there because I don't think that's healthy, to just sit there and be somebody's audience, if there's no willingness for them to receive anything. Okay, going back to our example. The quest that I believe is going to lead to the liberation is, first of all, deciding that you're going to do a thorough introspection of your belief system, because your beliefs are going to help you understand your inner world. I mean, everybody is operating from a set of beliefs, and all of our beliefs are slightly different. Now, I think that if we can tune into, the beliefs that God says are the best for human beings, then we have the best shot of creating the kind of, outer life that is, I don't know how to describe it. I mean, I could say, I feel comfortable saying the life that is most pleasing to God. In other words, we are living as loving, kind, generous human beings that are also very productive, have a purpose, have all the positive virtues. Now that's a long and difficult quest to accomplish, because the world is not really encouraging that. We may be encouraging it with our lips, but we're not encouraging it with the follow-up. If you look at the media and the entertainment and stuff like that. The themes that are presented over and over are, for lack of a better word, they're more tribal in nature. It's like, well, this tribe is against this tribe, and the good people are against the evil people, and the black people have problems with the white people, and the Jewish people have problems with these people, and the men have huge problems with the women and all that. And that is true. These problems do exist. However, the premise for almost all of it I see is an us against them mentality, as opposed to we are all souls. Some in this life, some of them are male and some of them are female. And so the idea of, I was having this discussion with somebody the other day about these movies about slavery and the Holocaust and all these kind of movies that you come out of and go, yeah, those people really suck, man. They should be punished. They should be, abolished. They should be whatever. Like, it's a horrible thing. And so, even though I'm not saying that we shouldn't understand history, but what I don't think we're teaching is that we're all the same, and that we have to learn how to appreciate the differences of each other and live in harmony with that, as opposed to, reflecting on. And to me, that's a belief system that's sitting upon the planet, which is preventing us from manifesting world peace that a lot of people say they want. How are we going to get to a place of world peace, which is an outer expression of an inner place of acceptance and love of all human beings, and that there's plenty of land for everybody, and there should be plenty of food and water for everybody, and there should be plenty of health attention for people. In fact, there really wouldn't be nearly as much of a need for medical services if a lot of the stuff got cleaned up. Because, first of all, the whole food industry would stop putting out so much garbage, because they can make a lot of money when they sell Cheetos as opposed to, organic vegetables. Yeah, because human beings have a weakness for certain types of, fatty, salty, sugary foods. You put them in your mouth, it's like, it doesn't matter if I'm hungry, it just feels good, right? Well, I personally, if I was the ruler of the world, I would say, you cannot make those foods anymore. I mean, not until we really change the palate of human beings, and then we can maybe introduce a few things as specialty treats. I think about those Christmas movies where the kids are so excited they get an orange at Christmas, Can you imagine if you give your kid an orange, give your kid a Christmas, an orange at Christmas? They'd be like, "What is your problem on orange? You could at least give me some Cheetos, man. At least I can be respected by my friends." So, I think that if we really had this stuff worked out internally, we would eliminate a lot of these foods, because the companies would not be governed by, like, if I can make money selling this crap. They would be like, this is not good for people. And, we're not going to be stealing everything, creating all these needs for insurance. Because if something happened, we would take responsibility for it. As opposed to, well, I've got to be so protected against the possibility of somebody taking legal action. I mean, if people's belief system was based in honesty and integrity and care for every human being, then a lot of the stuff would just fade away. There wouldn't be any need for it. I mean, that's a huge pipe dream, but I'm going to hold on to it, because maybe at some point it's going to happen. I mean, I'm just going to believe in it, or at least going to try to contribute to it. The challenge is that, of course, it creates a strain when you try to integrate that in, because there's going to be a lot of resistance to it. And that resistance, to me, stems from these belief systems about how people, that it's okay to go, well, these people can be slaves, because look at them, they're not that educated, they're not that attractive, they got no other choice, so I'm doing them a favor. I mean, you guys know, slavery is rampant all over the world. I mean, it really is. It's quite disgusting. Of course, it's kind of masked in strange ways maybe in this country, but this country, it's rampant as well. There's many, many people who are brought here under false pretenses. Their passports are taken away, and then they're forced to, be slave laborers for people. And of course, the sexual slavery is rampant all over the world. I mean, that's happening right now as we speak. It's crazy. There must be a belief system that that's okay, right? So the corresponding outer expression of it is seen in the fact that we have this kind of society. We have places all over the world where you can go and pay for sex with children. How is this all going to change? Well, to me, being an advocate against it, and these groups that want to bring awareness, okay, I mean, it's not that I'm not in support of that. I am in support of that. But I personally don't see a ton of movement based on just increased awareness. I think people have to be examining the inner, recognizing that that's how the corresponding outer is going to change. So we'll move aside from the global and just move to the individual a little bit more. I think everybody who is honest about doing spiritually evolving will have to go, yes, there are places within myself that I can imagine are out of accord with love and peace and all that. And if I have aspired to this perspective, this tribal mentality of just being so enraged and angry at Donald Trump, or men for doing this, or women for doing this, or white people for enslaving blacks, I mean, I'm still in that mentality of us against them. And so, can I do the work internally through my meditation process to reach a new level of understanding, to recognize a place where these beliefs, to a certain degree, are still keeping me captive to an us against them mentality? That is challenging work. That is challenging work, because you may not be able to just go out into your social circle and share what you are experiencing, because people are very convicted in their ideas of how things are supposed to be. So if you're on this quest for freedom, which I highly encourage, there is a road less traveled, the narrow gate, as Jesus speaks about, that can sometimes make it difficult to choose that, because you do kind of end up being a little bit isolated from the mass and the social acceptable circles. There's one particular area that I want to highlight, which I think is probably one of the most difficult and very rarely discussed in Christian churches. And there's three passages in the Gospels. I might end up quoting them because I looked them up this morning. And these are things that some of you may not, I don't know to what degree you know about them, but one of the most prominent here, let me just read this from Luke chapter 14, because I think anybody has to stop and go, okay, how do I make sense of this one? Luke 14:26. Whoever comes to me and does not hate father and mother, wife and children, brothers and sisters, yes, and even life itself, cannot be my disciple. Okay, that's an intense passage, right? Whoever does not hate father and mother. Now back in Matthew 15, he talks about, he's accusing the Pharisees of saying, well, you claim to honor your father and mother, however, he's accusing them of not taking care of their parents in their elderly years, and that they're claiming, well, I'm giving all my service work to God, so I don't have time to take care of my father and mother. The third passage, Jesus talks about, I have not come to the earth to bring peace. I have come to bring a sword. And that sword will separate mother and daughter, and father and son, and et cetera, et cetera. So clearly there's something about family here that is worth contemplating. How is it that somebody is coming to earth to bring a message of love, saying, unless you hate father and mother, brother and sister, and even your life itself, you cannot be a disciple of Christ? So let's start off by going, well, it's going to require some effort on my part to reach a place where this is congruent with God's message of love. Or I go, well, that passage is probably wrong, so I'm just going to exclude it. Or, well, clearly, whoever translated the Bible got this piece wrong, so that's right. Okay, so we can make those choices, but I would rather fight against that. And I would rather go, is there a way that this passage, these passages about parents, can actually liberate me without me, hating people? I don't want to hate people. Yes, and I will talk about it now, and it's up to you to decide how you want to interpret it. But those rules at some point constrict your freedom. When you are a mother to a newborn child, yes, of course, that child is completely dependent upon you. I would still say that your primary identity is as a soul, and at this time in my life, I am a mother who has, made a choice through my relationship to bring this child into the world, and I am going to care about this child with all the fibers of my being, and it's going to bring out such incredible expressions of love for me. Okay, that's beautiful. He's not saying, I don't experience him saying, like, yes, when you have a child, you should hate them. You hate son and daughter. No, it's nothing like that. But if for the rest of my life I become identified as a mother, and my children who are now 20, 30, 40, 50, I'm still holding them to this pattern that I am their mother and they owe me something as a result of that, or I have a certain obligation to them as a certain result of that. That is not going to lead to the spiritual liberation. The individual at 18, 19, 20, that's the age that I think we should really kind of go, okay, my role for the most part as mother or father is done, and now I become sort of an elder mentor to whenever you would like help. And yes, can you stay at my house? Yeah, if you're respectful, you can stay at my house. We move to an adult-to-adult relationship with a history that, of course, is, I'm your birth father and stuff, but I set you free. And I believe that Jesus is using this language, that unless you hate father and mother, to me he's saying there has to be a fairly visceral rejection of that role in order that, A, you liberate your children to go and live the life that they are entitled to live, whether you agree with any of it or not. I mean, some of them are going to make choices that are just going to make you cringe, and others are going to be horrifying, and some of them are going to just make you happy, and some of them you're going to go like, I wouldn't do it, but hey, it's fine with me. I really believe the soul is entitled to that. And if I have not cultivated a life, a spiritual life, it might be very disturbing for me to no longer be perceived as this person's mother, or that I'm not really supposed to be involved in their life or their decisions to a degree that I have wanted to. If my identity has become so tied to that aspect of myself. But there's a whole other life that's waiting. Let's say at the age of 42, both my kids have reached, 20 years old, and now it's like, wow, the last 20 years I've really dedicated myself to being the parent to them. So there's kind of a, what do I do now? I don't really know who I am without that role. Okay, well, so there's a responsibility and a pressure to outgrow that, to let that go. I'm not saying love them less. I'm saying revert back to my primary identity as a soul, and what am I going to create now? What is my life going to be about now? Now, in a lot of situations when people do start to make these this consciousness actually resonates, and they go, oh, okay, like I know that it feels true, I want to get there. And then he talks about, well, I have not come to bring peace but a sword, because you may get to this level of consciousness, but other people in your life may not, whether that's your aging mother, your children who have been quite accustomed to you still taking care of them into their 20s and 30s, or whatever it is. If the relationships are in some form of codependency, and you begin to withdraw the codependent part and establish simply a love connection, which is, I love you, but you're an adult and you get to do what you want. And if if you come around to my space, it's not like you're a teenager and you get to eat all our food and stay for free. It's like there's respect, and we're going to talk about it, and we'll figure out what works for everybody, because it's good for you and it's good for me. Well, some people will be outraged by such a thing, and they will be very angry by it. And so when Jesus talks about bringing a sword, it's been my experience in teaching people who want the mystical path, who really want the complete liberation, the true relationship with the presence of Christ within that is a real thing. It is not just a fluffy, new agey, I felt so much light and the angels were singing. It's like, okay, that's cool, but do I actually have a connection to Christ that I can say, it's real, and a teacher who has taught me validates, yes, you have that. Okay, so if you want that, you're going to be, 1 out of 1 million people, because it's just not that popular to do that. And then what happens when people start to exert this higher consciousness is that the friendships and the familiar relationships experience a pressure, because you are no longer willing to live a certain role which you have perpetuated for a long time. And that's scary, I suppose. I mean, it's scary if you feel it's imposed upon you, right? I mean, if I was the son and my dad was coming into this enlightened state, and he's been, let's say, sending me money every few months because he can tell I'm struggling, wants to support me as an artist and stuff, and he's like, you know what, son, I'm not going to call you son. You know what, Andrew? I realize that I've been kind of enabling something. I'm not going to do that anymore. I meditate on it. I don't think this is helpful. Okay, so you can imagine I might resist that and go, well, why don't you love me anymore? Why are you doing this? I thought you were trying to help me and stuff. And he's like, well, in my spiritual process, I realized that actually this was not helpful to you. So the sword is that element that the individual who is not necessarily wanting to evolve into a higher consciousness is faced with sort of the pressure of the other person in the relationship is. And that creates, like you said, father against son, mother against daughter, whatever, brother against sister. Because now the established tribal rules, you're violating them. Well, I don't think you're violating anything, except you are stepping outside of a way of relating that was not true to yourself, was not freeing to you. It was a role that was imposed that you accepted, whether you accepted it willingly or not. And now your soul is going, I don't want to do that anymore. I want to be free of it. Now, you remember at the beginning when I started, I said, I can't sit here and go, it's all about happy, because I have not experienced that. I mean, I don't like being in conflict with people. And it's painful when people have very strong opinions against you. Or it's painful to watch somebody that you love go down a track that is just leading to incredible grief and anger and animosity for them, and yet is caught up in a victim mentality and can't see it. I can't sit here and go like, well, I'm sitting under the Bodhi tree and I'm just enlightened with love for all humanity. I mean, I don't experience it that way. I find it quite devastating, actually. But then, an hour later, I might be, this is a bit of a thing for me. I played squash yesterday. I beat a guy I've never really beaten before, and it was really, really fun, exciting. It was triumphant. I was like, wow, that was like, he wasn't upset about it. It wasn't like, we have this kind of animosity. It was just like, that gave me a lot of joy because it just represented something that I worked really hard at. I just love playing squash, and I love playing this guy. He's a great sport. And for whatever reason, I frickin', I beat him yesterday. And I was like, there was a residual, like, good feeling about that. Okay, and then other things happened last night, some of which, like I made a fire in my fireplace, and that always brings me joy. But then about 15 minutes later, the fire died down, and I felt sad. No, just kidding. I mean, it changes very frequently based on, what's happening. I would say at the core, that feeling of freedom does not wane. I know that I have the freedom to respond to the situation.
Throw another log on.
Exactly. I know. It's really that simple. So, what I would like to leave you with, because I'm sure we'll have a nice discussion, whatever people want to share. Everything is resolvable through consciousness. And consider the possibility of, I would like to be as free as possible, because when I'm free, I can make choices and create a life that is unhindered by my tribal background, because we all grew up in a tribe of a family, we grew up in a tribe of a race, we grew up in a tribe of a country. There is tribal mentality all over the place. And there's going to be some good that we can glean from that, and there's going to be some stuff that's limiting to us. So we have to go within and explore what are the positive beliefs that I learned in my upbringing, and how are they contributing to a good outer life. I pay my bills, I'm kind to people, I'm generous in these ways, I'm very patient in these ways. These are all virtues that I learned from my dad. He was this kind of person. Okay, as well, things I learned from my dad are this and that and that. And these are not positive, and they still exist inside of me in some way, and they end up manifesting outwardly in these ways. And I really don't want those negative expressions of my belief system to be part of my life anymore. So I must go in, identify those beliefs, and then I have to break the loyalty to father or mother. You could say that's where I hate father or mother. I hate the things that I learned from them that are contributing to a negative expression of life. So I have to, it's amazing to me how many people are loyal to the negative patterns of their fathers and mothers and don't realize, just look at alcoholism in a way. How many people become alcoholics who were raised by alcoholics? I don't think they're going to stop and go like, well, I'm not trying to be loyal to my family. But to a certain degree, there is an element of that. There's a loyalty to the pattern that was demonstrated to me. This is how an adult acts, even though it might have been torturous. At a deeper level of consciousness, I go, wow, I chose the same path. So I have to now choose a different belief system. The belief system is no longer that alcohol provides this whatever. Something else must provide it. Now, I haven't been an alcoholic, so forgive me if I'm transgressing and creating something that's offensive, because I know some people have been through this or are. But it's really very liberating to recognize to what degree have I adopted the negative belief systems to a certain degree out of loyalty. Look at racism. Like if you grew up in a household where your dad is cussing out other races, and then these kids go into high school and they have the same kind of attitude, thinking, well, I'm just doing like what the grown-ups are doing. This is the way it should be. There's a loyalty to that negativity. There isn't. The consciousness has not awoken yet to go like, what am I actually doing? So you go into meditation and you explore using the outer to go, okay, the outer is reflecting something within that I would like to change. And then I go in and I begin to explore. What's really cool is that, the signature of the energy in the outer is what I'm looking for on the inner. And that takes some practice. So sometimes we need a little help. We need a little guidance to be able to see these things. So the understanding has to change. Somebody has to go like, no, that's not actually true. Somebody taught you that's true. Let's acknowledge that. This is actually true. Then the person has to decide if that's true, if they're going to go with it. And then they have to begin to do the work to, to peel away that cellophane and risk, well, what if it's not true? What if all of a sudden I do become completely neurotic in emotion and I can't control myself? Well, a teacher can assure you that that's unlikely. When you have consciousness and you have a process, you're not going to become completely, emotionally debilitated. There may be moments where it feels out of control. But in reality, the human being, I experience, the soul has a sort of a system to it, and you would have to succumb to that emotion and sort of become somewhat neurotic. If that's the thing that one is worried about. But anyway, that's a sort of an isolated example. So I think that's what I kind of wanted to focus on today, this idea of the corresponding inner and outer, micro and macro.